Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Stage is a series on this channel where games are played in the Commander Tavern for your entertainment. On this episode of The Stage, we have a 3DH match between a Ghired Conclave Exile tokens deck piloted by Stephan, the Locust God Draw for Value deck piloted by yours truly, and a Syr Gwyn Knight Tribal deck piloted by Josué. If you like any of the cards played throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. Other ways you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. Higher tier patrons get access to my Discord server as well as early access to scheduled videos on YouTube. You can find a link to that down in the description as well. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Stephan keeps an opening hand of a mountain, a plains, a forest, swords to plowshares, voice of many, elemental bond, and fires of Yamavaya. I keep an opening hand of 2 islands, a reliquary tower, force of will, ever-flowing chalice, swan song, and Jace's projection. Josué keeps an opening hand of a swamp, a plains, temple of silence, blood crypt, knight exemplar, shining armor, and pure steel paladin. Stephan wins the die roll, so he starts us off. He draws a card and drops a forest. He passes. I draw a card, drop an island, then pass. Josué drops a Temple of Silence. He scries 1, then passes. Stephan draws a card, plays a plains, then passes. I draw a card, play an island, then tap out to cast an ever-flowing chalice with 1 charge counter. I then pass. Josué untaps, draws a card, then plays a plains. He taps out to cast Pure Steel Paladin. He then passes. Stephan untaps, draws a card, then plays a mountain. He then casts an Arcane Signet and passes. I untap, then draw a card. I play an island. I tap out to cast Jace's Projection. I then pass. Josué untaps, draws a card, then plays a swamp. He enters combat, sending the paladin my way. I choose not to block and take 2 damage. In his post-combat main phase, he casts Shining Armor, which triggers the paladin, drawing him a card. Then the armor enters the battlefield and gets attached to the paladin. He then passes. Stephan untaps, then draws a card. He casts an Elemental Bond and then passes. I untap, then draw a card, giving the illusion a +1/+1 counter. I play a Reliquary Tower. I tap out to cast Mind Spring for X = 3. The illusion then gets 3 more +1/+1 counters. I then seek Retribution and enter combat. Josué can't block and takes 6 damage. I then pass. Josué untaps, then draws a card. He plays a Temple of Triumph, so he scries 1. He then taps out to cast Knight Exemplar. I immediately respond and cast Force of Will for free. He then passes. Stephan untaps, then draws a card. He thinks a bit and then passes. I untap, then draw a card, giving the illusion a +1/+1 counter. I cast a Soul Ring. I then cast a Gilded Lotus, finally getting access to red mana. Feeling aggro, I once more enter combat, sending the illusion Josué's way. He chooses not to block and takes 7 damage. I then pass. Josué untaps, then draws a card. He plays a swamp. He then casts Steel Claw Lance, triggering the paladin and drawing a card. He then equips it to the paladin. Afterwards, he passes. At the end of his turn, Stephan taps out to cast Advent of the Worm. When the worm enters the battlefield, it triggers the enchantment and he draws a card. He then begins his turn, untapping, then drawing a card. He drops a plains. He then taps out to cast his commander. When he enters the battlefield, he creates a rhino that triggers the enchantment, so he draws a card. He discards during cleanup and then passes. I untap, then draw a card, putting a +1/+1 counter on the illusion. I play an island. I then tap out to cast my commander. With the leftover mana, I cast Reforge the Soul. Everybody discards their hand and draws 7 cards. The illusion then gets 7 +1/+1 counters and the god creates 7 hasty 1/1 flyers. I then enter combat, sending the illusion Josué's way. In response, he casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting it. I gain 15 life. I then pass. Josué untaps, draws a card, then plays an untapped Clifftop Retreat. He casts an Allied Reinforcements, creating 2 2/2 White Knight allied tokens. Then he casts Oboros Signet. He passes. Stephan untaps, draws, then plays a Fabled Passage. He cracks it to fetch for an untapped basic forest. He casts a Sundering Growth to my Gilded Lotus. It resolves, so he destroys my only source of red mana, as well as populating another worm token. The enchantment triggers, so he draws a card. He then enters combat. Ghired triggers, populating yet another worm token. This once more triggers the enchantment and he draws a card. I block Ghired with the Locust God. I don't block anything else and take 14 combat damage. He goes to the end step, discarding down to 7 and passing the turn. I untap, then draw a card, creating another insect token. I play a mountain, once more getting access to red mana. I cast Ashnet's Altar. I sacrifice 3 insects to the altar and tap some lands to cast Omniscience. In response, Stephan casts Slice in Twain, targeting my altar. In response, I sacrifice another insect to the altar and cast Negate, targeting his removal spell. Then Omniscience resolves and enters the battlefield. I cast Skull Clamp for free. I cast Whirlpool Drake for free. I shuffle my hand into my library and draw 2 cards, creating 2 more insect tokens. I cast Thulwar Stone for free. I use the remaining colorless mana from my pool to equip Skull Clamp onto one of my insect tokens. It dies, so I draw 2 cards, creating 2 more tokens. I sacrifice 1 to the altar to get 2 colorless mana. I use 1 colorless mana to equip Skull Clamp to another insect token. It dies, so I draw 2 cards, getting those 2 insects back. It's pretty clear to the table at this point that I can do this indefinitely without a net loss of insect tokens. I keep this up until I draw into Laboratory Maniac. No one was able to respond, so I deck myself for the win. Well, this was a surprisingly short game. I don't run any tutors in this deck due to all the draw spells and effects, but being able to assemble an infinite combo with the counterspell in hand to protect it was just icing on the cake. I had a decent hand, so I kept it even though I had no red mana sources, but that was fine because everyone had more or less the same start, although my Jaycee's Illusion was getting out of hand pretty quickly. However, thanks to that, Josué used his Swords to Plowshares on it, that way it wasn't used on the Locust God when I comboed off. I didn't know Stephan had a Swords to Plowshares of his own in his opening hand, so that Reforge the Soul was clutch since it deprived him of his. Had he had that, exiling the Locust God would have stopped the infinite combo I had assembled. He did try to stop it though, but thankfully I had a negate in hand. This is why it's so important to run responses in your decks. so much so that I even made a video about it, which you can see if you follow the link above. Stephan's Sundering Growth deprived me of my only red mana source, so had I not drawn into that mountain, I would have been color screwed because of it. The game was too short to really appreciate anything these decks do. At least you could tell how devastating Stephan's Ghired deck is had he not lost a combo. I lost a huge chunk of my life and would have probably lost another huge chunk of it in the following turn. Josué didn't even manage to cast his commander with how short the game was, but I've seen a couple of Syr Gwyn decks and they're definitely a force to be reckoned with. In fact, I made a deck tech for both of these commanders and you can find links to them at the end of this video as well as in the description. Even my own deck won pretty quickly, so you couldn't see the other things it does. It's more typical to get huge creatures like Jace's Illusion and Oneirophage and the like. However, the Locust God will be featured in a future episode of the brewery, so stay tuned. Although short, we still had a blast playing this game and I hope you had fun watching it. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I also want to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. It also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Stage on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy playing.